Hey you, it's true with the first look at the new avatar, LUDMILLA. And while she is of the light element, she seems more like a combo of the previous Earth LUDMILLAs. Her speed is on the slightly lower side with 334. Overall, she's very much geared to support your team, and the first skill is no exception, because Divine Strike grants 5 spirit, costing 70 time units and dealing 75% damage to one enemy. However, the damage doubles for each charge LUDMILLA has, and so this could deal up to 600% damage, while still giving that before mentioned 5+ spirit. It doesn't quite end there, because she also is granted 1 charge and the counterstand status effect for 300 time units. So this is the longest kind of non-skin counterstands that we had so far in the game. If you want, this is like an attack and counter on steroids. Her second active skill is much more expensive because it costs 3 spirit and 100 time units. Combo Drive deals 600% damage to 2 enemies, ignoring damage reduction effects on them, and also weakening them in case they survive. On top of that, all allies are healed for 500% of Avatar LUDMILLA's attack. And yeah, as the name says, the combo already gives it away. She can use this one whenever she unlocks it with damaging an enemy with another attack. However, I can already tell you that this other attack has to be Divine Strike, because she doesn't have any other attacks. Her third skill is called Light's Embrace, costs 0 spirit, 70 time units, and immediately gives all other allies that are below 50% of max HP the next turns by reducing their current time units to 0 and 1 and 2 potentially. As usual, active skills that grant turns cannot be used by any of the affected units until after they had that turn. And not only are these sub 50% HP allies granted the turn, they are also healed for 100% of their max HP and purified. Avatar LUDMILLA is also granted 1 charge for each affected ally. However, this skill is only usable if there is at least 1 other ally on the battlefield that has less than 50% of max HP. Well, that makes sense, because otherwise you might not want to use this skill. Then the Divine Strike is much better. But the more important part, the more important restriction here is that it's only usable if there is no ally guardian on the battlefield when Avatar LUDMILLA has the turn. So yes, after Hichikata, this is yet another unit that is kind of promoting a non-guard play with her. And her final skill is an instant skill and called Divine Purification, 0 spirit cost, and removes negative status effects like sleep, burn or poison from one ally. And then there is a new feature in Evertale that is called the Purified Chain, and this is what Avatar LUDMILLA also grants to that one ally if no Purified Chain is among allies at the moment. A unit with Purified Chain will purify another random ally after their turn, and then they will pass the Purified Chain to that ally. So this can be quite nice. However, Purified Chains will end if the unit with the Purified Chain is defeated, leaves the battlefield or falls asleep. So the last part here is a bit of a drawback, and even besides the fact of that, I would still say that the recovery mist that Yukata LUDMILLA brought to Evertale is still superior to this kind of Purified Chain mechanic. All that said, it certainly doesn't hurt though, and it is an instant skill. It is a non-cost skill, and the skill only becomes locked for 10 time units after use. So definitely still the best single target purify skill in the game that is non-RNG. Arguably even more interesting in many battles will be her passives. This is also exemplified by the battle you see right now on the screen, already a battle preview. Barrier of Light is her first passive, and it basically makes her a stun absorber whenever there is no ally guardian on the battlefield. This condition is basically checked at the end of each turn, so she can, switch seamlessly back and forth between being a stun absorber or not, depending on whether there is a guardian currently with her on the field. Avatar Ludmilla comes with a permanent 50% damage reduction from attacks, but is not affected by damage reduction effects granted by ally barrier type skills. Speaking of which, she does come with a barrier herself, granting all other allies 35% damage reduction from attacks, while she is on the battlefield with them, and as long as there is no guardian among allies. So it's not as powerful as the power barrier on Water Anya, which also works with guardians. Here we go back to the likes of Storm Anya and Earth Ludmilla, where the barrier only activates when no guardian is around. So as you can see, this is already the third part of her skill set where she really wants you to have her without guardians among allies. However, barriers do not stack, so even if you run her with somebody like Water Anya, not suddenly all of your ally units will benefit from 58% damage reduction. Now you might already understand why I said earlier that the passive skills are probably even more important on this unit, given that she is a kind of part-time stun absorber at the very least, and so might not be getting many turns. However, we are not done with her passives yet. She can still benefit you greatly while highly stunned, besides the fact of absorbing the stun that would otherwise be redirected at your more potent DPS units. Each time Avatar Ludmilla takes damage from an attack and survives until after the end of the turn, she weakens all enemies. And if she survives until after the end of the turn with more than 1 HP, she will gain 1 charge and heal 30% of max HP. All of that happening passively without her needing to get the turn. And then we come to her second passive, which is called the Divine Intervention. If an acting enemy unit has had the turn 2 or more times already within the last 10 time units, they are granted the sleep status effect for 50 time units at the end of their turn, even if they have already slept while on the battlefield. So basically a forced sleep if enemies are acting too often. Of course, the thought goes immediately to the recent Steamroller Cthulhu. Although it's not a full counter, it can definitely help your team among, not just against Cthulhu, because the kind of repeated turns are more and more in the meta for sure. Then comes the part that combines really nicely with her stun absorb ability, because whenever a non-conjured unit on the battlefield is defeated or sacrificed by any source, so that is allies or enemies, she will gain the counterstand status effect for 300 time units. So passively gaining that, and at the same time having potentially very, very high time units, is a very nice thing, and actually the first time we see some kind of stun absorb mechanic in combination with a counter stance on the same unit. And as always nowadays with the kind of charges, she comes with a charged hold ground, can store up to 3 charges. If she would be defeated while having any charges, she will consume 1 charge to survive with 1 HP remaining instead, so no healing back up, and unfortunately she also only enters battle with 1 charge, so at this point she will basically only have 1 hold ground. Of course, she has some ways to gain charges later on, and the charge mechanic on her is still definitely better than on somebody like Okita. So yeah, that's it. All in all, what are my first impressions? I mean, we have already had a light LUDMILLA back in 2019, and that unit is, even after all that time, still sticking around in the top 50. So the threshold or the benchmark laid by that unit is quite high for this new avatar of light LUDMILLA. But as I already mentioned at the beginning of the video, this LUDMILLA doesn't really play into the same kind of guardian archetype, more like the opposite, given that she really likes to run without any other guardians. And that is a bit of a shame and quite limiting to her. Of course, I mean, we are kind of pushing away lately against kind of guard-dependent playstyles, but it is definitely still a limiting factor, and outside of using her with Light Anya, you could definitely see some applications if she could run with Guardians and hide behind them. Then again, to be fair, her skill set is kind of geared towards also getting hit later on, hopefully triggering that counter stance and making all the stuns that she received kind of worthless again. Now the good part is that she can work pretty well, I think, with pretty much any team except Burn, and in my eyes is a much better unit than the previous light support Genie. There are question marks about her hate level, which should increase when she has more charges, which is actually a nice mechanic for her, considering that at that point she is more survivable, or she has more survivability at that point, and loses the hate once she loses charges and becomes more vulnerable. Generally, her hate doesn't seem to be super high though. That can be nice, considering that she just sucks in all those stuns, potentially also from burn teams, so that your other units can do the work against them, as you can see on the screen right now. Another plus is that while, yeah, some of her healing, etc., is based on her stats, it is a unit that doesn't really have a skill awakening scaling, given that she is mostly geared towards support, that she is mostly geared towards possibly absorbing stuns. I could see her providing some quite decent value at 1 copy and low stats already. Her introduction is a bit of a nerf to stun teams, but at the same time it's a bit hard to think about which kind of team type absolutely needs to integrate this avatar LUDMILLA, and it's rather questionable whether she can break into the Platoon 1 meta. I think only if her value is high enough so you can actually run her without guards, and Platoon 1s without guards become more common, but I'm not convinced of that just yet. So I would proceed with caution. She is definitely not a top 10 unit in my eyes for Arena, and even if we are just looking at 1 copy utility value, she doesn't quite come close to Storm King Arthur. Let's see how Avatar LUDMILLA will perform on the battlefields. Stay tuned for more about her on this channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to become a true carrot. And as always, thanks for watching.